Welcome to Shenanigans Ensue with
Mary SanGiovanni!
Hi folks, this is Mary SanGiovanni, and we are up to some cosmic shenanigans once again. This week, we are going to talk about a movie called Black Site. It was written and directed by Tom Patton. It, from what I can tell from the research, was completed in 2018, but it looks like it wasn't released until 2019. And it is an unapologetically cosmic horror movie in every possible delightful way. One of the reasons I chose to talk about this movie today is because it is pretty much what I think of when I think of modern cosmic horror. It takes a lot of the cosmic horror tropes which work and revamps them, gives them a facelift and uses them in a cool way. But it also takes a lot of the tropes about, say, Lovecraftian horror, which may be outdated or maybe don't work with modern fiction and modern storytelling, and it turns them on their ear. And as we've talked about in past episodes, that's a fairly common thing in modern cosmic horror to try to upend those tropes. And I think that Black Site does this pretty well. Now, stylistically, it has almost like an 80s science fiction kind of look to it. Sort of reminiscent of Stranger Things, with the opening credit type of that kind of style, that sort of 80s SF style, Basically what it's about, it's a post-apocalyptic setting and in a post-cosmic horror situation where essentially at some point the elder gods, and they're called elder gods in the movie, they return. And an organization in 1926 known as Artemis, which is a black site facility, their job is to return the elder gods to where they came from, to the other dimensions where they came from. Okay? We have a female protagonist, Ren Reed, okay? And that's one of the first things that modern cosmic horror does, and I think does well, is it finally gives women some agency beyond being vessels, for the birth of these elder gods. And what I think is interesting is most of the main characters in this movie are women, and you see how women react to an extent, how modern women react to cosmic horror. Okay, that they are very much take charge. They're very much gruff in this movie because they're primarily military people who are used to this being a job, but are maybe not quite used to all of the emotional implications of this kind of job. And they process those the way normal people would process them. What they do, okay, they call them deportations. They have these creatures, which they call hostiles, okay, and these hostiles are graded on different levels. So you've got like level 10s and level 8s. Okay. And what they do, and I think this is kind of interesting, is they do employ sigils because despite all the science and technology of this futuristic, post-apocalyptic modern world, they realize that the elder gods still respond to a certain degree to magic. Now, what the science behind these sigils and wards is never really discussed, but the facility is painted with them everywhere because they recognize their effectiveness, which I think is kind of a cool little technique that they do in this movie, is that the insignias on their uniforms are a kind of sigil. The sigils are painted on doors for containment units, things like that. And that there is a complexity of locks and security systems that go along with this, which are part technology and part old school occult magic. So it's really kind of a neat little updating of that particular aspect of it. Now, Reed she's an agent at the Black Site. When she was a child, her parents were killed by an elder god. And she knows the elder god that killed them. Okay? Another thing that I kind of think is neat, okay, is that all of the elder gods, whatever names that they have in their own world, is really kind of irrelevant, but they're given names here because I think that's a very human thing. I think that human beings tend to name monsters because it gives them, it's almost like putting a pin in them in a way. It's almost kind of like pinning them down to reality. If they have a name, then they have an identity, and an identity is something that can be researched. It's something that can be understood. Something nameless, something faceless is a continuing mystery, and we have no power over mystery. We only have power over the things that we know and understand. So they're given names, and they're given names of ancient gods and goddesses that are, I don't want to say that they're the evil gods and goddesses of mythology. They are the gods and goddesses that reflect the night, or that reflect darkness. Because this other dimension is an outer darkness. So all of the few that are named, that we actually learn the names of, the few elder gods that we learn the names of, are named after ancient mythological gods and goddesses of darkness. The elder god that we get to see, both in its real form, which is also kind of cool because you don't always get to see that, and also in a human form, which I'm going to come back to, is called Erebus. Now, Erebus in ancient times was a god of darkness. He wasn't quite the god of night. He was the god of the darkness that happens before everything is created. Okay? So I thought that was kind of cool. Now, the system that they have, okay, the system that this Artemis site has, this Black Site facility has, to protect themselves against these hostile elder gods. As I mentioned, there are wards, but you cannot have guns and you cannot have explosions because those change the electromagnetic fields. They change the in a lot of cosmic horror, and it's not often addressed in detail, but it was addressed in Lovecraft's work. A lot of occult stuff, the reason that the world hasn't been destroyed yet is because it's actually pretty hard to summon an elder god. That and this is theoretically true in a lot of magic systems that exist today in the real world, that every factor has to be perfect. Every aspect of the ritual that you're doing has to be on point or it will fail. And if it fails, it could fail miserably and in horrible ways. Now, Lovecraft used this as a sort of saving throw in a lot of his stories, that all they have to do is misalign something. All they have to do is screw up one of these factors, and the doors that the elder gods are using to get here close. He did it in Call of Cthulhu. He did it in wow, I can't even think of the name of the story now. But he did it in a couple of things, a couple of different stories where the spells that they're doing. The Dunwich Horror. I'm sorry, the Dunwich Horror is what I was thinking of. The spells just need to be off just a little bit, and that basically is what keeps humanity safe. So, but on the same token, in the Black Site, they take the same precautions so that their wards aren't screwed up. Because apparently it's fairly easy to screw up the wards as well that protect the people who are working to send these guys back. Now, it's something of a complicated procedure to deport these elder gods, but I like that they take, again, another aspect of commonality in a lot of Lovecraft stories and turn it around. In a lot of Lovecraft stories, women, sometimes men, are possessed by an entity, or that they are somehow impregnated by this entity, okay? The Black Site procedure, the protocol for deporting these beings is to bind them to a human vessel. And essentially to let the elder god possess this vessel. And while in a human form, they can control it. Now, I guess the appeal of being allowed to... you get the impression from the movie that sometimes they kind of force them in there. And that, to an extent, the elder gods, I guess, at first were sort of tricked into doing it because they were given a form here. They were given a body here. But they didn't realize the limitations of that body. And I think at this point in the movie, where at this point in the storyline of the movie, they almost have to kind of like trick them or force them into possessing these bodies. And then they bind these elder gods to the human vessel until they get to the deportation facility. Okay? The deportation officer, as they put it, is Sam Levi. Okay? And Sam Levi is a bad person, or at least he was a bad person, regardless of the elder god that is going to be bound to him. He was he was a criminal, and a lot of these vessels apparently are taken from the criminal population, the ones who have been incarcerated for life, the murderers, the rapists, etc. Now, you'd think that this would exacerbate the situation, but I guess it kind of alleviates the guilt because it is apparently very painful for the human vessel to have this elder god because they beat the crap out of it. I mean, for one thing, if they have to subdue it, I get the impression that the deportation process is somewhat unpleasant. It's an interesting way, I think, that the movie makers that Tom Patton essentially tries to work in that idea of nihilism, that you've got the military who historically and traditionally are trained to be a gear and a cog in the great wheel of things. They are not trained for individualism. That's not how the military works. And then you have the prison population, which by society standards is generally considered, because of the crimes they committed, a population that, if you were going to use as vessels for elder gods, that would be the population to go for. So it's these little ways that he works in the cosmic horror notion that people are not significant. That in the grand scheme of things, we each have a little part to play, and it doesn't really matter in the bigger picture. In modern cosmic horror, and we've talked about this a few times, that what the significance of the human race is, it's acknowledged that, in the great big picture of things, humanity is not a huge part of it. It is not the central aspect of the universe, which is a lot of, which is it's sort of a foundational principle of cosmic horror, is that we're not all that, that there are things bigger and far more powerful and far more mysterious than anything we can comprehend, and that somehow diminishes our significance in the world. In modern cosmic horror, and we've talked about this in past episodes, a lot of times that's reframed to say, okay, yeah, that may be true, but there is still a point to being alive. Because if nothing we ever did matter, why bother? Why bother to fight? And really what it comes down to is that as a race, humanity is given moments. It's given relationships. It's given bonds. Bonds between parents and children. Bonds between lovers. Bonds between friends and brothers and people who have shown that they genuinely care about us. It's given moments of heroism, moments that change your life fundamentally, and that's the significance. That it may not be everything to the great universe, but it is something to us. And that's what this movie does. That's what this movie sort of reinforces. Because even the banishing of elder gods has become something sort of mundane, something sort of normal. It's normal to bind and banish these people, these elder god type people, and send them back to their dimension. Now, one of the things I think that it is interesting, one of the great aspects of this particular movie, it's billed as an action-adventure movie, not a horror movie. Although it does have elements of horror in it, obviously it has cosmic entities. To come back to the name thing, there's a conversation. They have Erebus bound. They have him bound in, I suppose you could call it a jail cell or a cage, but it doesn't look anything like that. It looks like he's standing on a platform, because what binds him is not the same thing that would bind normal human beings. He is in the body of this Sam Levy. I'm sorry, I pronounced it wrong. I'm sorry. It's Sam Levy. And he's in the body of this man. And as such, okay, he communicates with some of the main characters. And what I think is interesting about this, okay, is that we get a certain sense of all the things that cosmic horror does to all those tropes that it's switching up, all that modern cosmic horror is trying to switch up. We get a lot of that from the conversation that the main characters have with Erebus. For example, they keep trying to. They ask, "Well, what's your real name? Like, what are you really called?" And Erebus says, "Nothing in the cosmos cares what you call it. Nothing in the cosmos cares about you at all." Throughout the conversation, we see an extreme disdain for humans as being nothing more than dust. And he's trying to get them going. He's trying to anger them. And you'd think that it's almost like, and I think we've talked about this on past episodes of the show, if you were to try to personify the devil as a character, or God, in fact, God would probably be even harder. It is so difficult for us to imagine something that is an absolute, that I think that most portrayals of either God or the devil come across as being sort of flimsy or cheesy, really, because they don't ring true as an absolute. I've often thought of these elder entities as being something so alien and so foreign to us that it is an absolute, which would make, part of the horror, at least from Lovecraft's point of view, was the discovery of something that can't relate to us in any way, because, for one thing, it doesn't care about us, and for another thing, even if it did, we wouldn't be able to understand its motivations because it's something so alien to us. What I think is interesting about Black Site is that we actually get some insight into an elder god, which is, by, all cosmic horror accounts, just as powerful, just as strong, just as far-reaching and large and impressive and scary as any Lovecraft creature. But we actually do find common ground with it. And in a way, that introduces a new kind of horror, because we can understand some of its motivations. Maybe not all of them, but we can understand some of them. For example, okay, and this we almost never see, Erebus is in love with another elder god, an elder goddess, if you will, that they call Nyx. Nyx was the goddess of the night. Nyx was deported by Agent Austin, who is sort of a mentor to Reed, okay? And where they are deported, theoretically, they are deported to their dimension of origin. But even the elder gods don't know if that's true or not. They don't really know what happens when they're deported. And what is kind of fascinating about this is that it's the closest thing to a fear of death that you ever see from these creatures. Okay? They are sometimes scared. Sometimes the process is painful. Sometimes the process is confusing. and they're not quite sure if everything's going to be okay. And the fact that Nyx was deported means that Erebus lost her. He lost his mental connection with her. He lost his physical connection with her. And he is angry. We don't often see the elder gods caring about each other even. Even in Lovecraftian stories, they're generally portrayed as a warlike... I would say like indifferent in that they don't seem to have connections to each other, let alone connections to anyone else, unless it's like a master-slave kind of thing, okay? Or unless it's a hostile and warlike relationship where one of them looks to defeat the other. So we don't often think of them as even being capable of love. But by all accounts, Erebus does seem to love this creature, this other elder creature. Now, as I mentioned, there are some other popular symbols that come up, and before I discuss further some of the conversation that they have with Erebus, which I think is so brilliantly done, I should mention that, of course, this movie also has cultists, okay? Cultists that are breaking into the Black Site facility. But the beauty of this is that, and here's a spoiler, the beauty of this is that they're not there to free the god, to set him free so he can rule over the earth like most cultists in cosmic horror want to happen. What we find over the course of conversation with Erebus is pain. Another thing we don't generally associate with elder gods. The cultists found a way to use elder gods as batteries to give them power, to give them influence. All of it's actually pretty much the opposite of what Lovecraft suggests, that these elder gods almost feed off of their cultists. They feed off of their energy. They feed off of their bodies. They use them as slave labor until they're ready to discard them. In this movie, the cultists do that to the elder gods. Okay? And as Erebus points out, power is just an illusion. Who really has the power, who really has the significance, is just an illusion. Because Erebus keeps trying to tell them, you think you guys are the most important thing in the universe. You're not. To us, to the rest of the universe, you don't mean anything. Your lives have no meaning whatsoever. And the humans tell him, but we have each other. There's more significance in that than a creature like you could ever understand. And that's how we come to understand that Erebus does, or did once have, Nyx. He did have companionship, which shows, I think, that there's a certain horrificness in thinking that even our gods have weaknesses. Now, not that you necessarily want Erebus as your god, but what it shows, I think the horror of this movie is that what it shows is that all the way up the chain, no matter how high you can ascend in terms of spirituality or physicality, even if you were something more than human, you are still vulnerable to the kinds of things that humans are vulnerable to. Pain, love, and loss, okay? Another thing that we come to realize is that Erebus is scared, okay? The humans tell him that we do have purpose. Deportation gives us purpose. And again, that kind of goes back to the idea that we reframe our significance when faced with things like elder gods, who tend to want to diminish the significance of the human race because of the grand scale in which they exist. And they tell him, they say, we thought it was anger, we thought it was pain that is driving you to do this, but it's fear. You're scared, you're just as meaningless as the rest of us. And that, to me, sort of encapsulates the horror of this movie, that even the monsters, who are the cause of the meaninglessness in the universe, even they're afraid of not being significant. And so if the thing that diminishes humanity and diminishes humanity's significance, is in itself afraid of being insignificant, then that means the universe is somehow even bigger and even more indifferent. And there's something sort of terrifying about that magnitude, that raising of that magnitude of scale, I think. And Erebus says to them, it would appear that this universe is not just a cruel joke on your kind, but mine as well. Because what we come to find is that Erebus wants to be deported. That you could look at this as a suicidal elder god. He wants to be deported because he no longer cares about amassing power and significance in this universe. He just wants to be with Nyx. And if that means facing the unknown, he's willing to do that. The only time we ever see Erebus genuinely angry because of fear is when they tell him, well, you don't know that you'll be reunited with her. You don't know if you'll ever see her again. And I find that to be absolutely terrifying, his reaction to it. Because what he tells them is that, throughout the movie, he tries to mess with them. He kind of does what a lot of demonic possession stories do, where the devil will tell you something that's a half-truth. Something that's a lie, but it's clothed so cleverly in the truth that you're not really sure. And he tells them that there is no afterlife, that there is no heaven, that there is no hell. And they said, you don't know that for sure. Even you don't know that for sure. And he has this sort of knowing smile, like, well, I'm an elder god. Of course I know. I know everything. I know all the secrets of the universe. But when they do the same thing to him, when they say to him, well, you don't know if you'll ever be reunited with Nyx. You don't know what will happen to you when we deport you. If you'll ever see her again. He reacts violently because he's scared. And to me, that's terrifying. Because for the same reason, we fear death because we don't know what comes next. We have belief, we have faith, we have ideas. We try to use science to prove one way or the other about these things, but we really don't know. No one knows until they go through it. And we like to think, I think many people like to think, that there's a certain safety and a certain security in believing that if there's a God, at least he knows. He knows what happens. What this movie is suggesting is that something on the level of God, something that powerful, something that all-knowing, even he doesn't know what happens. And it's almost like being a child and finding out your parent doesn't know something that you need an answer for to feel safe and secure. If even your parent doesn't know, is there even an answer to be had? And to me, anytime you have a cosmic horror story that takes the horror out of the discovery of something and into the reaction of somebody to that discovery, when you look at the implication of something, and oftentimes the implication is that death is not the worst thing that can happen to you, that calm, peaceful oblivion that we hope for, or that heaven that we look toward, if neither one of those things is on the table anymore, then we're back to not knowing. And as Lovecraft always said, the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. So it comes full circle in cosmic horror that if even the elder gods don't know, then is there even an answer to have? And I think that, much like when we talked about the endless, where there are things that can be worse than dying. There are things that can be worse than the peace of knowing that someone has moved on. I think that is really kind of the brilliant aspect of this particular cosmic horror movie. And again, like I said, I like the idea that the cultists they're not there to help. They're not there. They're actually completely on their own. They've got their own agenda. They've got their own plans. And that there is human agency there, which there seldom is in cosmic horror, and it's seldom given to the cultists, okay? But that these cultists, I think they're kind of terrifying in a sense, too, that they would have the audacity and that they would have the ability to use a god, okay? To me, that there's something terrifying in the thought that, again, we often put a certain amount of faith in absolutes as being, if not incorruptible, indestructible. And if we can basically wear down a god to next to nothing, then the potential for horrors beyond what we can imagine, beyond death, beyond whatever we imagine comes after death, I think that there's something sort of terrifying in that, something sort of brilliantly terrifying in that. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed listening. If you like listening to this episode of Cosmic Shenanigans, you can listen to past and present and future episodes of Cosmic Shenanigans on Google Play, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, now on YouTube, on the Brian Keene YouTube channel. They're reissued on those. And all other places where podcasts are available. You can listen to it for free. If you enjoy listening to me on Cosmic Shenanigans, you may also listen to true shenanigans that we get up to on The Horror Show with Brian Keene, which I co-host with Brian Keene. If you want to show engineer Dave Thomas some love, you can check out his Twitch channel at twitch.tv/meteornotes, where he talks to his kitties and plays video games and gets up to shenanigans of his own. And if you would like to advertise on Cosmic Shenanigans, go to the Project Entertainment Network button, and there's the Project Entertainment Network website. There is a button in the top right-hand corner, I believe. You can click on that, and it will contact Armand Rosamilia, who's in charge of our ads, and you can do an ad through them that way. Okay? Thanks for listening, and I will see you again next week. Bye.
You're listening to American Top 40. More tragedy in the news today. Kim Kardashian has a new baby. What the hell? There's nothing good to listen to. Hey, wait, what's this?
Anything moist. You gotta roll that out.
See, it makes me do weird things. I don't like it.
God damn it.
I'd
be going down on myself?
Shit.
Hey guys, it's Bill
Mick.
Maya.
And Junior.
from the Unsupervised Podcast.
Check us out every Thursday on the Project Entertainment Network.
Take a break from the stress of the world and come have a laugh with or at us.
Bill.